Welcome to Big Blend Radio's Art Show, featuring Victoria Chick, a contemporary figurative artist and early 19th and 20th century print collector. Welcome, everyone. You know, the third Saturday, we always get to chat with artist Victoria Chick, and this is exciting. We're launching a three-part series all about the history of museums. It's actually the then and now of art museums, and I love this because it ties into the museum work that she and an amazing group of volunteers have gotten together to create what is known as the Southwest Regional Museum of Art and Art Center. This is in the Silver City region of Southwest New Mexico. It's an art community. Silver City's awesome. It's a place to go to for good food, good shopping, art, and more art, all kinds of art. And the Gila Cliff Dwellings National Monument, the Gila National Forest. It's a beautiful area in Southwest New Mexico, but to be really proper when it comes to an art community, a fine art museum is an important thing. However, they're looking for a place to actually create the museum, and they've been working behind the scenes for a while on this. And putting a museum, a fine art museum together with an educational component, even one that goes out into the smaller regions that surround them, is a massive undertaking. And Victoria was like, okay, well, let's talk about the importance of museums, why they are a necessity. Right. We've talked about that a lot on shows, but we're also going to talk about when did they start and why. So today is part one. We're going to go into the old world history of art museums. Then we're going to talk about American art museums. That's part two next month. And the month after that, we'll be talking about the 20th century to now, the changes of museums in the 20th century to now, which is really spans everything from technology to architecture. So stay tuned for those. But first, before I run out of breath, because this is a heck of an introduction, welcome, Victoria. How are you?
Thank you, Lisa. That's a wonderful introduction. You covered everything.
Did I do part of your speech? Yeah,
no, here. No, not my speech. We'll get to that.
Yeah, because I know, aren't you doing a speech, or is it past? Have I missed the boat on the speech?
I'm giving a lecture in the Western Institute for Lifelong Learning, which is a chapter here in Silver City, and it's associated with Western New Mexico University. So I'm going to be doing that Monday. So you guys are getting a preview today.
Oh, she's practicing on us, y'all. We get to play Art Doctor. Yeah, well, I want to give everyone your website, number one, for Victoria's art. She's a contemporary figurative artist and also an early 19th and 20th century print collector. Go to victoriachick.com. It's CHICK. And also for the museum to see what they're working on, you can go to southwest-art-museum.org. The links are in the episode notes as well. So check that out. So yeah, the whole thing of museums, this is so fascinating, this history, because you went way back. So let's talk about, what is an art museum? Like, how did it all start? Who said, all right, we're going to have an art museum one day? Like, I feel like Moses is coming with this big, his big staff.
Well, it goes almost back it goes back farther than Moses, but it goes back in ancient history, actually prehistory, for the most part, because it is close to 2,500 years ago, maybe even closer to 3,000 years ago, and it happened in the Middle East. The first museum that we definitely know about was the museum called, and it's Engaldi, Ennigaldi-Nanna, Nanna, two words. And Ennigaldi-Nanna was actually a person, but the museum is named after her. It was discovered in 1924 and worked on from an archaeological standpoint until 1934. So 10 years there. Leonard Woolley was the person who discovered it. He was a British archaeologist, um, there's so many. There's some great images of it. There's when you look at the area now, you're seeing what's been exposed. So you can see outlines of buildings, and you can see actually they've exposed a great deal of the actual museum. It's interesting how it got started. The princess was very interested in finding things. She had a curiosity, and she had an example. Her father was also, who actually was the Babylonian king Nabonidus, was interested in that too. So he really encouraged her. So what she did with these things that she found and other things that were found at the time, those items were probably more like they could have been 2,000 years old. Some of them, so some of them maybe only a couple of hundred years old. They were remnants of the civilizations that had been there before them. And she collected these. She put them in a building. We call it a museum. I'm not sure what they called it, but she acted like a curator would today in museums. She organized things. She classified things, and then she labeled things. I think this is so fabulous that she was organized. I can kind of imagine how this archaeologist would look at her, in amazement, because she was so far advanced as to her scientific attitude toward what she was finding. She made labels. I'll call them labels, but they were cylinders, like cuneiform cylinders, and they had descriptions of the object on them that would go next to the objects. Not only were they a description but they were descriptions in 3 languages. Wow. So we can infer from that people from other places would visit this museum that they formed. This is Neo-Babylon. So it's kind of toward the end of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. There was an earlier Babylonian Empire too, but when we come to her part in history, that was the Babylonian Empire was about to be destroyed, and her brother, I think, is very interesting. Her brother was involved in the death of the Babylonian Empire. You may have read about him, or your listeners may have read about him. His name was Belshazzar, and his father named him as regent. I guess his father kind of got busy with more with archaeology. But Belshazzar, if you look at the book of Daniel, chapter 5, the story is laid out there about how Belshazzar brought about the end of the Babylonian Empire. So that's an interesting story.
Wow. This is an interesting family. I mean, everyone, you can go, Google this, and we also have a link in the episode notes to Victoria's article, which is on the museum website, about this. And so this is where we would look at it being South Iraq today, right? That's yes. Where it is now, southern Iraq. So
right.
This is
the city of Ur. This is nearby where this kingdom's castle was located, and that right now it was used to be next to the sea that was there, but now it is in the intervening time. The sea has retracted, so there's not any water there anymore. Not a shoreline. So it's long gone.
But I think looking at the ruins, and of this. Everyone, there's pictures up on Wikipedia and stuff like that. But I mean, for that amount of time, it was like it almost reminds me of Chaco, but the way she did her bricklaying, and then on the outside, but then look at the actual museum itself. That's intense what was built.
The building itself is really sophisticated in
Yeah,
design.
that's what I was thinking. I'm
So,
like, that wouldn't be something you would think. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
yeah.
right. And so,
Mhm.
I'm going to say that I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that was our first museum. However, there may have been museums before that, but they just haven't been unearthed yet. They haven't been discovered. So I'm going to give her the credit.
Yeah, yeah, for what we know as of today. And that's with history, right? I mean, anytime
Right.
someone digs something up, they're like, oh, we found an older one and we found this. And it's just like science. Oh, one day coffee is good for you. One day it's not. No, now we found out it's okay again. Listen, they
Right.
just said red wine is a no-no. And no, I don't care because tomorrow you'll say it wasn't and don't ruin my wine time. So,
Yeah. Yesterday.
that is how it is,
Yeah.
it's whatever we discover at this time is this what we have as of now. But I mean, that building, it's interesting. DeGrazia Gallery in Tucson, his
Yes.
building is kind of shaped that way, his gallery.
Hmm.
Interesting.
Okay.
It's different. It's Adobe, but that
Yeah.
same kind of how it slants
Well, yes.
outwards.
The walls have extra support with buttresses in his gallery and in her gallery. So there's a style of architecture that makes
Yeah.
sense structurally, and it's been used for millennia.
This is fascinating because when you look at you're looking at what are they trying to show off? They're going, man, I saw that. I love museums. I'm one of those
Yeah.
people. I mean, I remember us doing this in the magazine years ago, Relics and Legends, as a column.
Mm-hmm.
Because you go in a museum and you'll see something, what the heck is that, right? Art or not art?
Yeah.
One was, I was looking
Yeah.
at this little pipe looking thing. It was a museum in Porterville, California, out in Central Valley where they grow oranges. And it turns
Uh-huh.
out this town has one of the, most prolific marching bands that toured the world. Who knew? It's a little farming community.
Yeah.
And so they have a whole display on all that. But now you're talking about all these farmers and their stuff that they, hey, let's donate this to the museum, right? Well, it's not just stuff. This is fascinating. I see this little oil lamp kind of thing, and I'm like, that looks different. Oh no, this is a Turkish whale oil lamp from like the 1700s. And I'm like, what's it
Mm.
doing in Porterville? And I'm going, but for the
Yeah.
locals, they get to see something that you'd probably only see in New York, which to me is amazing because,
Right.
where are you going to see a Turkish whale? Or have you seen a Turkish whale oil lamp? I hadn't.
Not
And
lately.
no. So there's all these interesting things you can find. One museum had it was Yvonne's museum at the Coronado Motor Hotel back when it was that hotel in Yuma, Arizona. She had a museum and it was tourism memorabilia. And she had a thing, how they woke people up, the switchboard from back in like 1930s, how they would remember how to wake people up in their rooms, do the wake up call.
Yes.
And it was
Yeah.
this thing and it was used. So I started, go down a rabbit hole as we're already now doing on the show. And I'm like, what is this thing? How this timing thing? It was like a timer. And I went down the rabbit hole, found out it was created by a wine making guy in Napa. And then it became how that same thing got used for cabs on the timing for getting paid for the timing and distance. And so this
Hmm.
technology is that some wine guy about how to go, how long the wine's in the tank and everything,
Yep.
that got used in the cab system and then in hotels later. And this stuff, people have things in the States and whatever, and it gets tossed. And I can see that happening
Yes.
with art, where people have no clue what they're holding on to. Watch me and Antiques Roadshow, and I frigging jump off a couch. I'm like one of those people who will end up in the hospital on Super Bowl weekend because I thought I could go play football and I can't. But that's what happens. And people do that with art. And so people that understand the value of showcasing something that is not an ordinary day-to-day thing that you're going to see is this amazing thing because and when it goes back these ancient times, um, I find this amazing. These are like your forerunners, Victoria. These are your heroes. Did you
Yes,
feel that going through
that's
all this
here.
history? Like, oh, I understand what she wanted. I know what she wanted with the
Well,
architecture.
I keep talking about making the first art museum in Southwest New Mexico, and then when I started about the first, I kept thinking I'm coming across all in my research all these museums that thought they were the first, and that occurred a lot. uh, and I think a lot of people claimed first because they were early, certainly, but they thought they were the only ones. But it really had to do with the lack of communication between towns or between countries, especially in Europe. So we find a lot of pride in people being to the forefront. You know, they really took pride that they believed that they were the first one to do this, and you know, I give credit to all of them because they were all early, and they may have been the first in their town, and they didn't know about a museum that was started up 15 miles away in another sort of dookie. So anyway, what you talk about, you've got to, as you see things that are passing that you don't know what they are anymore, and maybe they're only 50 years old, but it makes you curious. You want to know more, and curiosity is certainly the first step in museumology. And the second step is collecting it, and the third step is putting it somewhere where it's going to be safe. And those are where museums really came into the fore. There were a number of things. I mean, there were some early museums, but one of the things that led up to these museums were the fact that there were collectors. Because before there were museums, there had to be people out there collecting, and probably a lot of your listeners collect things. Maybe they, you know, I think we all collect little things when we're little. You know, we get rocks, or you're collecting
Baseball
seashells.
cards.
Yes, exactly. So we collect things, and some of them are museum quality, and some of them are things that we grow out of and start collecting, things that other people might consider as valuable. But anyway, everybody has a little bit of collector in them, I think. And I think that's one reason museums are so popular. Because people want to see, stuff. You know, they want to go to a mining museum, or they want to go to an art museum, or they want to go to a history museum. Maybe they want to go to a bottle cap museum. There are such things where
yes, there are. I mean, there's
collecting is wild.
But I mean, there's the one where that walkway in Seattle where everybody puts their bubble gum. I mean, that's gross, but they, you know, they do that. It's like, here's my collection, add to it. But people like collections, and because it tells a story, and that's what a museum's trying to do, is not just go, here's what I have, but you know, humans are societal, like, look at me, you know, this is what I've done. And when we've gone to so many mansions, and I keep going back to this one in Erie, Pennsylvania, and it was the guy who created asbestos as the newest thing for roofs. And I mean, Erie, Pennsylvania was like such an industrial place, Erie Canal. I mean, the history is fascinating. You know, the War of 1812, and I love Erie, Pennsylvania. I have a thing about this place because it was just like nature and history, just like, oh yeah, watch this, you know. But this guy's house, he didn't care about anything other than, look at me, I'm an entrepreneur. So they had the biggest solarium for plants and everything. They had all these engravings done in the woodwork in the house. He didn't care about it. He didn't even know what it was. All he knew was if I have this and I put pineapples on it, it means I'm rich. I want my friends to come and see I'm rich. He had a cigar room with
Okay.
everything was so ornate. Look at me, you know?
Yes. Now that's interesting because if it's one of the important things about museums is there wouldn't be any museums unless there had been wealthy people and or wealthy organizations like churches to begin collecting this stuff. And I'm glad they did. One of the very first ones was there was Pope Sixtus IV. He was operating in the 15th century, and if you can imagine being in Rome after what Rome went through, the sacking of Rome by the Vandals, or the hordes from Turkey that came and destroyed Rome, and various other battles that happened. All the sculpture, all the beautiful buildings that had been done in the first and second centuries BC and the first and second centuries AD. They were chipped, they were broken, they would fallen over. Some of the buildings were still very good, but when you can imagine just the litter that wasn't cleaned up after all these battles. Anyway, Pope Sixtus wanted to raise the consciousness of Romans in the 15th century to what the glory had been. I mean, they could still see these broken buildings and stuff, but he gathered as many bronze statues as he could find that showed the myth of Rome, or the glory of Rome, or the
opulence of what it was. Yeah.
So he took these statues and he put them on a Capitoline Hill, which is one of the hills of Rome. It's not the highest one, but he put them up there. I think there were about 12 of these statues that he put up there, and that was in 1471. So the interesting, he did not do it for a museum reason. He was just trying to instill greatness in the people that were there then, as to what had happened before, that they could be proud of. So the interesting thing about this, it wasn't a museum until 234 years later. There was another Pope Clement XII. He opened the first of a number of Capitoline museums. These are on top of Capitoline Hill. Anyway, they were there, and when it came time to open the museum in 1734, he sort of encompassed the statues that had been put in earlier by Pope Sixtus. So they could claim, or they did claim, they actually didn't claim at that time because it wasn't important to be first until tourism got popular. So later on, the church started calling it the first museum. And because it was actually started in the 15th century, not the 18th century. So they considered the sculptures. So anyway, so people, I mentioned tourism. I mean, tourism is really important to museums. And museums are really important to tourism. People want to see museums. And so everywhere there's a museum, you can be sure that people will come and visit it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really true. I mean, you go to any city, the first thing you do is look, okay, these are the museums. I want to go to the natural history. I want to go to the art museum. You start looking at, okay, these are these things you're not going to see somewhere else. And it's different than, the power of museums. Now we have Google and Wikipedia and all the online galleries, which are great. Make no mistake, because we can't go to all the museums in the world. All of us can't do all of it, right? So I think it's taking the museum out. So like what I love about going to your museum, and I'm still calling it a museum, even though it's not, they're looking for their building or
Right.
building it as it goes. If you go to, again, southwest-art-museum.org, you'll see that you can see some of the art, the paintings that have been donated. They've got a research library too, by the way, everyone, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So you've got stuff that people can, I shouldn't say stuff when I talk about art, but you have art
That's
that
okay.
people can, if, already experience now today, so I just want to put that. So the online presence
Yeah.
and during COVID, oh my gosh, what museums did. I know that's getting to the 20th century into the now,
Yeah.
but
COVID,
what
COVID,
museums did
COVID really,
were amazing.
yeah. The COVID really disrupted museums in worldwide, and I would say that they're probably they probably dropped millions of potential listeners and people that would go to museums, viewers, because people were scared, and
Oh yeah.
there were so many restrictions that made it impossible for many people. However, since COVID has been over, in the last several years, museum attendance has gone up, and I think it's really interesting to note that there are more people that go to museums by the millions than are go to sports events.
Yeah, that's good. That means we've
I
got a
mean,
little education.
it's like a
Not
$60
knocking
billion
sports.
yes,
Yeah.
$60 billion a year business, because people
Yeah. And
want to see what's in there.
they want to see what's different and new and old as well, new and old. I mean, there's a crochet museum in Joshua Tree, y'all. Just saying.
Yeah,
So it's a
yeah,
little bit of everything. But what I was going to, like COVID, the museums really were able to do online programs for people. So it was different,
yeah,
but they changed gears and they're changing gears. We're going to get into that, I know, on part 3. But my point is like
yeah,
museums, when we didn't have the internet, and I remember what life was like without the internet, without cell phones. I remember telephones that are now in museums. So just saying, I remember what dial-up sounded like. So I know, Victoria, you were in the same boat of that, but when you
yeah.
look at the power of museums through history, we didn't have Google. When you think about the thought that went to behind the Vatican museums, and I'm so glad you can pronounce all these names because I ain't doing it. I'll give them a new
Well,
language. But
and
it's
these early
amazing.
museums, the early museums were not public museums. They were private, and you was
Oh,
the people with the money, people with the power, did not assume that people not exactly like them would be interested in this stuff or should be interested in it, because they were in a different class. There were different classes of people. I know that sounds so foreign to us today, because museums are one of the wonderful things that are public that everybody can enjoy. I think one thing I want to mention, if we have time, is that before there were museums, I mentioned there were collectors. Well, probably from the Renaissance on, maybe even from Gothic times, this occurred. But there was a phenomenon called cabinets of curiosities.
I love this. I love this title. I love that title because I want it as a band album, an album title.
Yeah. So anyway, individuals, and they were wealthy individuals, mainly because they actually had a room in their house that they could devote to this. But cabinets of curiosity were rooms in private homes, and they only got shown to these people, whoever owned the house, to their company.
Like the dinner party people.
Yeah, it would be kind of by the way, do you want to see my collection of so and so? So they would say yes, and they would go in and they would marvel at what the owner has collected and how he's displayed it. It was usually just a room, because cabinet is an Italian word for room. We also had instances where inside the cabinet, the rooms were small cabinets like furniture, like you would find in furniture. So you would open the doors to the cabinet, and there would be tiny little things that the person had collected in there. There's some. I mean, most of what they collected, though, at this time, this was a time of exploration, and so people would collect curiosities that were fish that were really bizarre. They weren't seen them before in their lives, or bones that they found. So there was a big variety, but that would be inside these rooms.
Aren't masks like a mask? And those kind of things?
Probably not, because these were in Europe. And,
okay.
People would collect masks and stuff later on. Maybe it'd be more like a 20th century thing.
Okay.
But yeah, if somebody had a personal collection of masks, you could label it that. But because it was their own personal collection, and but that happened a lot in the early, say, 15th to 17th centuries in Europe. But what happened then? People who owned these cabinets of curiosities would die, and so. But at the time they were dying, there was a push for more public museums. So a lot of the early museums, like the one in Switzerland, and there was one in Germany. They got started by people's own curiosity cabinets being given to the museum after they die. So
then it becomes public. Instead of someone's house.
So yes, so all those collections that were private are now public. Almost, because one of them, I know one of them was given to Oxford University. So there was the Ashmolean Museum, and it was given by a guy named whose last name was Ashmole. And so there were a lot of examples of that, how private cabinets of curiosities were the start or major contributor to museums.
I love this because it does tie into tourism in a very weird, ancient way, right? Where it's like, I went across here. Yeah. Well, and okay, speaking of masks, Italy has those masks, right? For their carnivals and things. But, it is kind of like a bragging thing, but not. It's kind of like, I went here, and now, look at where we are now. I know I keep going to then and now, but it is a then and now. We have Instagram. Yeah. What's the difference? It's a huge difference, y'all. Real difference. But it's like, now, look, I finally got into Antelope Canyon in Arizona, right? Not everybody gets there at the, it's, you have to have reservations and things like that. So if you get to a place that's hard to get to, you're going to take photos and you're going to go, look at me on Instagram. I went here. Look at this. It's fascinating. And some people do go out of their way to tell the story behind it, what the experience, the history, that kind of thing. So what's kind of interesting about this Cabinet of Curiosities, it really goes to human fascination. People want, and the Cabinet of Curiosities, I really love that name. I mean, I love that because it's kind of like, what are we looking at? And I think it leads to circus stuff too, because if you look at the Elephant Man and all of that, isn't that kind of
right?
The curiosity is like, oh, we've never seen a person look like this, the tall person, the small person, I hope I got that politically correct, everyone. But really, you know what I'm saying? It's like they have. We were like, oh, we didn't know people could look like this, or animals could look like that, or it was part of education and understanding the world is far bigger, yet still small because you're able to see it. It's fascinating, but we are curious, and that's why social media has such a big thing. Yeah,
and that's why we've talked about a lot of museums, and one of the modern definitions of museums includes the fact that the objects in them are there to be preserved, and the fact that all the things that are preserved ought to be exhibited for the public from an educational standpoint. So that's the modern definition of what a museum should be. And a lot of early museums were more depending on the people, they were more curiosities. They were just things to be marveled at. But you didn't ask yourself why this was this way, or where it was, or what it represented. There maybe not have been as much questioning and research over things that were collected as there is today.
Well, it's interesting because, like all the people I know travel, and, like Nancy and I travel full time, so I can't invite you to our house right now, but our home was filled with all the stuff from Africa. It was kind of a cabinet of curiosities of
Sure.
and the mask thing is big. There's a bed and breakfast we went to in Hummingbird Inn in Easton, Maryland, and he traveled the world as a professional chef instructor for big resorts before he opened the bed and breakfast. And boy, can he cook. Oh my God. Yeah. Candied bacon, big, thick candied bacon strips with Old Bay seasoning. Yeah. I'm like that. And it comes in anyway, it was really good. And you get bellinis, when you have the bacon, but he had a wall and that's where the mask thing came to me, because we started collecting masks because, well, we've done a whole show on masks with you years ago, right? But the mask thing is interesting because it really ties into a culture of fantasy and reality. And it has that dual thing, but he had this whole wall when you go up the stairs in the bed and breakfast, this Victorian inn. It was Halloween when we went there too. So it was even perfect, even better. Like he had the whole thing decked out. But it was interesting I'm getting to a point here. The point is how he had them collected, right? So I'm thinking about these people who did this in these very historic times. Going to the first one in Iraq, where we're talking about Babylonian times, we're having this museum.
Right.
And then I'm a Virgo brain, so good for magazine work, because now we love to collect and put things in little boxes, and you're going to see all these masks. And when you look at the masks all together, it tells a different story than one mask. Here's a collection of masks. So you can now go, ooh, this one has similarities, and yet they were halfway around the world. What is that about?
Right.
And if you want to learn further, you can or not. Like in a bed and breakfast, you just need to go and talk to him and then ask him which is from where, and then you can go down your own rabbit hole. But a museum knows how to put collections together to tell a big story that you can go and delve in deeper later. Does that make sense with what I'm saying? And I think back then they even got that with the way she had her museum laid out. That lady is amazing. She is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the idea, I think one of the big changes in museums occurred in the 19th century, but probably started in the early part of the 19th century, because in Europe at first, the Industrial Revolution was beginning, and because of the Industrial Revolution, you had more people more groups of people who had money that had never had money before, and because of that, education had expanded. So you had people who weren't in the upper classes being educated beyond just really basic stuff. So education had expanded, and then that because travel was expanding at the same time. Anyway, all these movements that helped to produce museum expansion, and people were interested. Even if they had never been to a museum, that was just something to aspire to get to a museum. Because by now, because people were more literate, newspapers were more common, and newspapers meant more people were literate. So English and German archaeologists were really discovering things in the 19th century. They were discovering. In fact, they used the Bible for a lot of their beginning places to go to, because they went to Greece, they went to Crete, they went to Babylon, Egypt certainly, Mycenae, all these places, and they would find things. Well, they were finding these things, and they wanted some place to put them. They wanted to be recognized first for finding this. One of the things that happened, well, there was already sort of a museum, a British museum, that had been founded in the 18th century. That was the British Museum, but the British Museum needed to expand because Lord Elgin, who found all these sculptures in Greece, wanted to display them. He shipped them home. Before he had a place to display them or not, he just shipped them home, and then he gave them to the British Museum. So they accepted them, and that was a big deal. They had to expand the museum because the things that were coming were so huge, and to display them correctly, they had to have plenty of space.
Wow. So this is really the history of how, wow. Yeah.
So the British Museum, is a big deal. It's huge. It's got wonderful things that people can see. But the Greeks really did not appreciate him taking those treasures out of Egypt. So, anyway, the British, they were always asking to have everything back. The Greeks wanted it back. The Egyptians wanted it back. And of course they were ignored. And then the British Museum House of Commons and committee, they met and decided in 1816. They found that Lord Elgin had illegally acquired the sculptures, and the museum therefore became the legal owner of the sculpture when he gave them to him. So then that might seem one-sided, but anyways, even since 1816, people have wanted to have their own stuff back. So the Greeks argued that Elgin stole the marbles and didn't take them legally, even though they were on display in the British Museum. The most recent one is in 2014, UNESCO offered to mediate between the museum and Greece, but the museum decided no, they didn't want to have it mediated, so they still have the stuff. So
that becomes interesting. Yeah, of who owns what. There's that controversy going on right now, right? With some of our local ones.
Sounds pretty colonial, but on the other hand, they certainly preserve them, and and they had the money. They had the money to see that they were preserved. So I don't know. It's a question that probably won't ever be exactly resolved any different than it is right now. But the British Museum, because the British Museum was what it was, and there were a lot of people from Britain that came to the United States, especially in the South and the Mid-South. We have a group of people who were museum minded coming to the United States, and in 1776, of course, the country was founded. However, in Charleston, and you guys have been in that area, there's a Charleston Museum. It was founded several years before the colonies became the United States.
See, that's
which
the
I think is
thing.
really
Yeah.
interesting. And
Yeah.
it still exists. It's still
Oh, see,
there,
no.
and still, yeah,
You see, we just did a show on Charleston, and the history there is
yeah.
fascinating. It is deep. It's
So their museum
they
is
knew.
not an art museum. It's about the history, and they're very upfront about history.
Oh yeah. And but the history too, like when you're talking about, who owns what. All right, now the Native Americans are trying to get some of their ancestors home from
Yes,
museums. There's a war going on with the Smithsonian on it, and it's in different
yeah,
entities. But that's a sign of the times, right? So what we
right,
did in the
yes,
past, what we're doing now, I mean, it's one of those things where everyone has to come together and figure it out and work together. What you're doing with the
right,
art, I think is fascinating because it you're showcasing contemporary as well, right? It's not all historic. And I think that's the other thing we need to talk about for museums is that museums are, yes, history, because even if it's like a new artist showing new things, it's still going to become history, right? And it's about the topic, right? Don't you think? Not everything's history, not all of it, but it can be later.
Well,
You know what I'm
I think
saying?
everything. I mean, everything is every breath we take. Maybe it's history. However,
Yeah.
museums have to discriminate between certain
It's not a
things,
gallery.
like
It's not a gallery.
what's the
Yeah.
what's the best representative of this era, or what do we
Hmm.
have? They may not have the best representative, but they can still, if they don't have the best thing, they can say this is indicative of something. You museums are stuck describing what they've got, and
Yes,
hope that's why some people believe. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, or they are the facility for a museum exhibit that travels the country or even the world. Some things
Yeah.
travel, and the
Yes.
museum is able to host this for somebody that can't get to Alaska or to New York City. But here
Right.
it's coming to your town. You are able to see this for, this amount of time, and you better go get it, and that keeps the
Right.
museum contemporary too by showing history.
Oh
And
gosh.
now, yeah.
And there are more discoveries every time. I have had the opportunity in the Nelson Gallery and Atkins Museum in Kansas City to see the Chinese warriors from the first Chinese dynasty
Oh,
when they traveled the world in the 1970s. I mean, that was I mean, it's so
you're not going
exhilarating
to
and
see it again.
so
Yeah.
no,
It's,
no. Um, I mean, it was wonderful.
I've
And
only
right
seen
now
pictures
with
of
the
that,
museum,
you
oh,
know.
it's incredible. And now I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of individual Chinese terracotta figures they had, but the face on every one was different.
I've seen like a few in different museums, but not like what you're talking
Hmm.
about. Like they'll have
Right,
like, we have
right,
the one, this is one, and they're like, it's a
yeah,
prized possession. But that's the thing. This is storytelling. And I think Victoria, when you look at museums from the history part, yes, the cabinet, I love the Cabinet of Curiosities. That should be a
yes,
movie or something. It'll get
yeah.
weird. It could get weird. Just like, the Elephant Man. But, the,
One of the things we're trying to do with the museum here, as far as bringing art to everybody that wants it in Southwest New Mexico. I mean, we're talking about a huge geographic area, and
and I'm going to say undeveloped. Can I say that? That it's not
yeah,
city.
you can say that
Yeah.
yeah, it's basically rural. Are farmers. They're ranchers. They're miners.
Artists.
Anyway, and then there's some artists. Yeah, there's artists mixed in. But what was wonderful about loaning things and what we are intending to do with this museum, besides we have our own permanent collection, is that we are going to borrow from other museums, and we feel that way we can bring more art to our area. Mm-hmm. It gives all the people that come to the museum makes them better educated, gives them more inspiration, and certainly a lot of enjoyment. So from museums in the big cities like the Metropolitan Museum of Art to little places like ours, or places like in Arizona. I mean, you've got.
Yeah, I was going to use this as an example.
The size. Yeah.
I was going to say DeGrazia Gallery. DeGrazia Gallery from Ted DeGrazia. I mean, he's passed on. He right now their exhibit, and I'm not here to promote the gallery, though I love it, and everybody should go. But Ted DeGrazia is the most reproduced artist in the world, and his history is fascinating. He's multi-everything. Anything he can make art with, he will. But he studied under Jose Orozco and Diego Rivera down in Mexico City. Came back here, did his own gallery because people didn't like what he was painting. When he was down in Mexico City, he was painting depressing stuff. And he was like, he stayed true to what he wanted to paint at that time, and then said, well, shove off. I'm creating my own gallery. And then he moved on and created this really big one, and he built it by hand with Yaqui Indians and the Mexican peoples of the area. Right. He did his own thing, and I think it's beautiful. But here's what, he lived in Bisbee for a time with his first wife, and his first wife's family owned all the theaters out there, like the Fox Theater and everything downtown Tucson and in Bisbee. And he got fired for giving poor kids tickets to go see the movies. But anyway, he was born in a mining town in Morenci, which is right outside Silver City, by the way. If you go between Tucson and Silver City, it's beautiful. In a mining camp, which is now gone because the mine swallowed his town in his little mining camp. But he did a lot in Bisbee. And so right now there's a collection of his Bisbee paintings, and Bisbee is sharing this collection in Bisbee in 2 different museums right now through May, because he was sharing the history of the mining and the people, because he's always gone about what the people are about, the people of the Southwest. And not everyone in Bisbee can get to the gallery and vice versa. So, and it means something to that town. So like if someone's, painted Silver City, this would be important, so they're sharing their exhibit, and people can go there, and once in a blue moon, they'll show that. But that's not something you will see when you go to the gallery, which is now a museum. That is not what you're going to see every time you go there. You're not going to see those paintings. You're going to see the permanent collection and a rotating exhibit. And they are super lucky to have this collection. And this agreement between museums. They have to protect each other's work, protection, interpretation has to be done correctly. I mean, there's so much. But that's an example I was just going to share for what you were saying. I thought that made kind of sense.
No, that's good. That's good. And I think the interesting. I only know of one museum in Clifton, actually, which is basically in Morenci. But the mine, Freeport-McMoran, donated a lot of the ability to convert an old building in downtown Clifton into it wasn't a museum, it was a gallery. But I mean, it's just so wonderful to bring art to where people can see it.
Well, I think this about the history of art museums, because art has always told the story of history, whether it's music, whether it's writing, painting, ceramics, tells the story of the times. And artists tell the truth. They just are that nature. Or they're going to take you to Fantasyland so you can escape the truth, right? Whatever. But there's something about what's going on of the times, because even different art themes were created, right? So that would be the time. And I think, as I was going to say earlier about this, is through your conversation in your article, I think, Victoria, you're talking about also the history of education. Honestly.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Yeah.
I really believe that. It's the history of education, not just museums.
Yeah.
It's big. That's powerful.
It's all tied in. It's all tied in.
Man, I love what you're doing. Nancy and I both just are so proud of what you've done and proud to know you, and go, yay, look at her and all the people working with you. I know it's not millions of people because Silver City's not massive, but the people working with you to do it, it's this project is exciting.
It's definitely a group effort, and we would not be where we are without everybody pulling together. So it's taken us quite a long time to get to this spot, and we are ready now to.
They want a building. They want to nest. They want to nest now.
Yes, our ducks are in a row. Yes, and they want to nest in a museum. So
yes, that's right.
We are working toward that.
So funding, everyone, they do accept donations. So go check out the website again. This is the important part. Again, go look at it because there's already an online gallery there. So go to southwest-art-museum.org. All the links are in the episode notes. Go ahead.
We have had one really wonderful. We're asking for donations, yes, but we are really getting for people who want to give us more than a small donation. We are asking for them to give it in the form of a pledge, and a pledge that would be paid over 5 years time. So to kind of make it more manageable, but we have already had one offer quite large because we are going to be naming parts of our museum for people who have benefited a lot. So if anybody wants to give us a giant amount of money, $100,000 or something like that, we will accept that as a gift to be paid over 5 years, and that person then can name that part of the museum if they learn to name it for a family member or name it for themselves. We can do that.
That's wonderful. Wonderful, Victoria. Everyone, again, the links are in the episode notes. Thanks for listening. We're going to be back next month we're going to talk about American museums and art. So American art museums and how that started. So that's fascinating. I love this conversation. I don't know, but one day I still want to sit down and watch Antiques Roadshow with you because when it gets to the art thing, I go berserk. I go berserk on all of it. I mean, really, one day, Victoria, I don't know. We're going to have to do that because
it is fun. It is fun.
Thank you so much, Victoria.
Oh, thank you so much, Lisa. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. You can view Victoria Chick's artwork at victoriachick.com. Keep up with us at bigblendradio.com.